2023 at 5 o'clock. I will start with the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. I'll welcome everyone that's here this evening, and we will start with approval of agenda or additions to the agenda. Are there any additions? Seeing none, the recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Winters? Deputy Mayor Pringle. Well, all afternoon it's members, so now I've got to reverse and change my thinking here. So if there's no further discussion, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none, if one should arise, you may declare at that time. Minutes of previous meetings. Special council meeting from February 27th of 2023. The recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held on February 27th, 2023 be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Scholdice, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? Councillor Winters, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the 27th of February, in the special council meeting, I just noticed in the list of attendees that we have Councillor Thompson attending and being absent in the same meeting. And then Councillor Winters isn't listed there. If he could be added, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, is there any other discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. So that one should read as amended then for the motion, shouldn't it? Okay, so we can make that change. Then minutes for council on March 1st, that the minutes of the council meeting held on March 1st, 2023 be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Day. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Winters?
Sorry, I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but one little more housekeeping item on there is when under staff that are listed there. Mr. Lewis wasn't attending that night because he was at water main break. He was out at Satacardy Park at a water main break. So then when you follow through the motions or the minutes there, item number 18, when we went into closed session, he's listed as attending as well, and he was not there.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, do I see you with your hand up? Okay, thank you. So I will call the question or call the vote. All in favor? So that is carried again as amended. Announcement. Does any member wish to make an announcement? I'll let you go.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we've got a fair list of announcements. A lot of sporting events happening in the area here in Georgian Bluffs the past couple of weeks. So the first ones are the Shell Lake Minor Hockey have qualified for the Ontario Minor Hockey Association Championships, and they are currently competing in the Western Ontario Athletic Association Championships, and that is the U11, U13, the U15, and the U21 are all competing at the Ontario level. So that is for the Shell Lake group there in hockey. The Shell Lake Skating Club members achieving Skate Canada Gold Test for artistic skating. Liv Evans Nicola, Ilya McCombie, Megan Nieringberg, Sarah Hemstock, and Michael Stockner are some of the names that have went to the Skate Canada Gold Test, and a couple other pieces of information for broomball. Anybody knows the broomball game? We competed at the All Ontario's here on the weekend. We had 2 gold medals, the Tara Bulls, which is an intermediate men's team, and the Kilsyth Young Guns, which is an intermediate ladies team. Both won gold. Grey Bruce Storm, which is an elite ladies team, won silver. And two other teams from this area that were down and participated were the Kilsyth Phantoms and the KTWs from Katy. They come home with some bruises and sorrow, but no medals. So that's just a bit of what happened in the broomball world. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Are there any other announcements? Okay, seeing none, we shall move on then. Public hearings. So the recommendation that the regular meeting of council be recessed to hold a public hearing for zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-23 for Melissa McLeod and Cassio Mosquera. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote then. All in favor? Is carried. And I will switch over to this. So this meeting has been called to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-23 for property legally described as concession 3, part lot 14, registered plan 16R 6761, part 1. Madam Acting Clerk, please advise the method by which notice of this public meeting was given.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a frog in my throat. Through you, Madam Mayor, notice of this public meeting was given by ordinary mail to all property owners within 120 meters, 400 feet of the subject property, by email to all the prescribed bodies on February 15th, 2023, posted at the subject property and posted on the Township of Georgian Bluffs website. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of Georgian Bluffs before the proposed zoning bylaw is adopted or passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Township of Georgian Bluffs to the local planning appeal tribunal. The person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party.
Thank you, Madam Acting Clerk. Do we know who is proceeding with the review here? Is it Rebecca or?
Yes, Rebecca.
Okay, Rebecca Elphick. Please proceed with your review of the application.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, zoning amendment application Z-03-23 proposes to amend the RU provisions of the retained parcel from application B02/23 to permit the following: a reduced minimum required lot area from 0.8 hectares to 0.6 hectares, a reduced minimum lot frontage from 100 meters to 83.1 meters, and a reduced minimum side yard from 10 meters to 4 meters. This zoning amendment application was a condition of consent application B02/23. It has been demonstrated that the proposed application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the County of Grey's official plan, and generally complies with the Township of Georgian Bluffs zoning bylaw. It's recommended that zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-23 from Melissa McLeod and Cassio Mosquera be approved.
Thank you. No members of the public registered with the clerk to provide comments in support of or in opposition to the application. And I'm taking it the application or the applicant is not present.
I'm here.
Mr. Davidson, would you like to address this?
Yes, thank you. And I know enough to keep it short when things appear to be going well. So this proposal rezoning application is a requirement, as you heard, for a consent application. It was approved last night, which is good. Simply, it involves it's not a new lot, it's a lot line adjustments. My clients own both of these parcels of land, and the area that they'd like to settle from the south end from the south property, for all intents and purposes, is kind of used already with the north property. There's a garden in there, a little bit of an orchard. There's a shed, but again, it belongs to the south property, but it's really used in conjunction with the north property. And the owners would just like to make sure that this is before they ever sell the property, that this little lot line adjustment occurs. So it is a minor thing, but it does shrink the one lot to a size that's a little bit less than the zoning bylaw requires, but don't be alarmed. The smaller lot is still over 1.5 acres in size, which is a good size property. Like I said, the Committee of Adjustment approved the severance last night, and getting the rezoning approved was one of the conditions. That's all I have to say, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Does council have any questions regarding the proposed application? Seeing none, the recommendation is as follows. It has been demonstrated that the proposed application is consistent with the Provincial Policy Statement 2020, conforms with the County of Grey's official plan, and generally complies Township of Georgian Bluff zoning bylaw 2020-020. It is recommended that zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-23 for Melissa McLeod and Cassio Mosquera be approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Coburn, Councillor Schuldeis, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I now call for an adjournment for this hearing. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Day, any discussion? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. This public hearing is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Delegations and public question period. So we're starting with items on the agenda. So any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item on the agenda shall make written application to the clerk by 3 p.m. of the day of the meeting. To register, www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 603. And I see first person on the list is Mike Jones, to do with items 12.1.6 and 12.1.7, short-term accommodation. Welcome, Mr. Jones, and you have 5 minutes to address your comments to council. Something's not working, Carly.
Hi, I'm Mike Jones. I've been a resident of Georgian Bluffs for about a year now. I want to thank you, Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, and fellow community members of Georgian Bluffs for the opportunity to voice my concerns with the short-term accommodations regulations. My wife and I lived in Kitchener for 3 years, and we spent 3 years struggling with privacy, safety, and security, living next to a home that was used for drug dealing and other illegal activities, with a very limited police response. The home transitioned into a short-term accommodation with several people walking through our backyard into their back door every night. It only took 1 year of the time between having a family-oriented community to waking up to a police raid occurring in the neighboring property. We were looking into other communities to move to, and several people had suggested Owen Sound was nice, and specifically that Georgian Bluffs was quiet, family-oriented, and friendly. So we moved here just about a year ago and fairly quickly got to meet our neighbors, except for one. When we approached the family at the unknown to us Airbnb, we found out that the owner's name that had been told to us by our real estate lawyer was actually one of several shared owners operating an Airbnb. My wife and I are very happy living in Georgian Bluffs, and we try to be active community members through volunteering efforts. It's definitely a little disappointing to find the noise and privacy issues we encountered in Kitchener are here as well. I think it's unreasonable that as a property owner, it's my responsibility to police the noise and fire hazards of vacationers and celebratory fireworks. I would prefer an outright ban on non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Secondary to that, a restriction on short-term rentals where the owner does not live in the region. Requiring that property owners primarily live in the region can help enforce accountability for the affected communities. At the least, I would expect a strong nuisance bylaw to hold property owners accountable with hefty fines. The bylaw officers in Kitchener had very little ability to mitigate issues near us because the bylaws were not specific or strong enough. There's an MPAC listed property use bed and breakfast establishment nearby, and I have not heard a single complaint from neighbors about that business. Yet, anytime I see my neighbors in the vacation season, the first thing they ask is how I'm tolerating the Airbnb next to me. So of course I have to deal with the loud music, littering, dozens of cars parked in the street, and dangerous behavior such as unsafe fireworks being set off into the early morning, close to brush that is flammable. So I would like to stress the importance of a registration or licensing fee similar to that of the annual refreshment vehicle licensing fee. Even if we don't know how many short-term units are in the area, it seems reasonable to impose an annual licensing fee per unit to offset the enforcement costs. Collecting fees and requiring a license may help collect the data to understand the magnitude of what enforcement costs might be needed, as well as making the property owners more up to date with the changing bylaws. Licenses also allow the ability to revoke or disallow habitually offending properties. The fees might not make money for the municipality, but it doesn't make sense to have the affected residents footing the entire bill to maintain businesses that export money out of the region rather than grow more local businesses here. Sure, there are lawn maintenance, housekeeping services, and some restaurant workers who can earn a seasonal income through these businesses, but these groups are seasonal and aren't supporting local businesses as a full-time resident would. So thank you for listening to my concerns today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. And your comments are well taken and will be considered as we move forward with this process that council is now going through. Next on the agenda, Maria Winicki, and on the same short-term accommodation. And welcome, Maria. You have 5 minutes to address your comments to council.
Well, all of that he said, I want to say, so this is a little difficult for me. So I'm going to tell you my story. The slogan that you have, come for a view and stay for a lifetime, I am the poster child for that. We came here 6 years ago just to see where maybe in 10 years we want to move. And a week later, I own a house here. Absolutely not ready. Was selling my house in Mississauga for 6 months, but I just love it here. We are also active in community. I cook voluntarily for people that are not rich and deliver the food and help us as much as I can. My husband is now becoming a firefighter volunteer, and he used to work for township snow plowing, hired by Rick. Like we are active people in the community. I live next to a place that have cottages for rent, and most of you know I can write a horror book on all those stories, and I'm not here today to talk about that because with the new bylaws, the nuisance bylaw, that will all come out. I want to talk about the registration fee because how I see it, there should be this year, since we have cost, there should be a fee for registration. The licensing fee can come next year with all the rules, all the data we're going to have, like you guys going to have, you're going to decide. But registration for running businesses from properties that they pay taxes, residential taxes, like I do the same way. The fees, I have a dog. I called some of you, and I keep on bringing my dog to that. I have a dog. I have to pay a licensing fee, registration fee every year. My dog is a small white puppy that lives in my fence backyard. I don't really use township roads where my dog can maybe make a mess, but we all pay. Maybe there is a pet owners that you have to send bylaw to there. I pay for that with my fee. So the way I see it, this is the same situation. Why should any other people, but the people who have the rentals, pay for that bill, that the 90,000 that's going to cost this year to come and have the data? I think that fee should be divided however you guys decide between the people. Registration should come with a fee, and from there should be taken. I looked on the communities near here or even far here, like Hamilton said that the registration gonna pay for implementing and running the program. Lambton Shores took a year. They have a registration fee first year, and then the next year they have the licensing fee, which is completely different. So now they gather the data. And I called some of you, and I understand that there was that meeting in January where you find out that they say, please wait, don't rush. And I am absolutely agreeing. Sure, don't wait. But we shouldn't wait, like with the fee for registration, that should be done immediately this year for this year rentals. Because I really feel almost like I'm sorry, slap in the face that now I'm dealing with this next door, and then I'm gonna have to pay part of my taxes, gonna pay for that bill. And when they run a business from there, they probably, even that fee gonna be written off as part of running business as the taxes are. So, they all making money on the rental, and we're going to be paying for it. You know how many people deliver food that they kind of don't have any money? Like I bake bread and deliver that, and I see really poor people. Why? In the taxes, they should be paying for somebody making money. And then everything he said to that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. And again, your comments are valid, and we will certainly be taking them into consideration as we move forward with this process. Next on the list, I have Colin Carrera, and on the same short-term accommodation. So welcome, Mr. Carrera, and you also have 5 minutes to address your comments to council.
Thank you for this opportunity. So today I received a phone call, and it was come support me at Georgian Bluffs, and it was my neighbor Maria. And with that, just know that I have nothing prepared. I don't know, I know what I want to say, but I just don't have it written down. So it might come off a little unorganized, and I'm sorry. So I live on the same street as Maria, and I've been dealing with similar to the same sort of issues that Mike before Maria has been mentioned about just noise and nuisance and all sorts of kind of issues about living next to a business that rents out to 12 rental cottages. So this morning I sent emails to some of the councillors. Some of them have gotten back to me. Thank you for that. It included just like 3 main points of kind of what my concerns were. I'm going to say them now. They echo a lot of what Maria has mentioned. So the first being, actually maybe Maria hasn't. One of the things about this short-term rental or short-term rentals is there are no rules or anything kind of put in place, a framework, some sort of rule book that's going to say what you can and can't do. You give people an inch and they take a mile. So for years and years, there hasn't really been a real rule book, and there's been the development of a shoreline. What does that mean? It means just the entire shoreline has changed over the course of the years, and I provided the councillors with before and after photos of what that looks like, and it's a big difference. The second part of the email was talking about kind of what the cost is whenever some of these issues with the Airbnbs, when they call, say, the police end up billing the township, from what I understand. So any sort of occurrence that happens results in a bill to the township, and we all pay that from our taxes. And if there's at least 5 that I know of that were responses that I know that are occurrences that happen, and 3 Maria knows of just like invalid sort of calls to the police from these business owners, then that's also something, maybe a cost that the township incurs. And then the last point is there's a shore road allowance, which is being used as on Facebook of this business as a private beach. So we are all kind of paying for road allowance, or, you know, like this road allowance to be maintained by the township, but it's being used to incur profits for a business. And I don't think that's very fair. I think that maybe we should be having some sort of cost to these businesses so that at least we feel a little bit better about other people profiting within the township. Now, if I was hosting somebody in my house, I would make sure that they have a towel, a toothbrush, or, you know, make sure that they have a nice stay when they're here. And we want that for anybody who wants to come visit Georgian Bluffs. I know we do. And we definitely want to encourage people to come visit and stay at these places, hotels, what have you. But we have to have a set of like rules, like I said, where the septic has to be good. Like there has to be a lot of good parts about where you're staying. You can't be, I don't want to, you know, have to find out that like in some towns, there's something that happened in Montreal recently where there was inadequate fire alarms and people had lost their lives because as a result of just this poorly maintained Airbnb sort of thing. So anyways, I've been following this. I wanted to come today and talk and just kind of share that opinion with some of you to reconsider maybe having that fee, having some sort of initial registration fee. And you know what? It sounds like you guys are on the right track. There's software that I've heard that you guys are going to purchase to track the amount of Airbnbs and kind of use that. But maybe consider also some software that can help with the registration of these Airbnbs. So it will be like take away from a staff member. The software can take care of it. It might be a registration you do online, but then again, if they're using Airbnb, they know how to use a computer and they can use Airbnb, so it's all online. So I don't know. There's another idea. Anyway, thank you for giving me the time to speak these words today.
Thank you. And I think, if I may, I would encourage everyone throughout this summer season, use Contact GB at the time when incidents are happening in your neighborhoods, because with that type of data, it gives council and staff here more information to move forward with. So I would strongly encourage everybody to make use of that, even if it seems it's repetitive over and over. That gives us some data to work forward from. So I thank you all for taking the time to be here this evening, and we will definitely be probably staying in contact with you as we work through this process. So thank you. And we will move on with, unless, Madam Acting Clerk, is there anyone else registered? Just what I've got here? Okay. So next item is delegates for items not on the agenda. So 8.2.1, community safety well-being planning. And in this case, delegates have 15 minutes to make their presentation to council. So welcome Sarah Penton, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Planning Coordinator from the County of Bruce.
Thank you very much. I'll just wait for the presentation to be pulled up, but I'll start. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about community safety and wellbeing planning in Grey and Bruce. The overarching goal of community safety and wellbeing is to achieve sustainable communities where everyone is safe, has a sense of belonging, and opportunities to participate, where everyone can meet their needs for education, healthcare, food, housing, income, social, and cultural expression. The eventual impact of this is a reduction in crime. So what does this mean, and how are we working towards this in Grey and Bruce? Next slide, please. This approach means focusing on protecting against risk factors that make people vulnerable to crime and victimization. We are working collaboratively and cooperatively to identify duplication or gaps in services. We're leveraging strong working relationships between agencies and across sectors. We're using data to track the collective impact of work in our communities and inform decision-making. And finally, one of the ultimate goals is to decrease the need for acute incident responses, emergency department visits, police service calls, which are reactive and costly. Next slide, please. This is the provincial framework for community safety and well-being planning. Acute incident responses, those reactive emergency responses, are in the middle of the bullseye. Our goal is to focus on strategies in the 3 outer rings: risk intervention, prevention, and social development. So what does this look like? Ultimately, this means that everyone is aware of services and how to access them for themselves and the clients they support. And where gaps have been identified, we're working together to address systemic issues through advocacy, investment, and long-term planning. We're focusing on addressing risks before a crisis occurs. Next slide, please. A visual representation of prevention might look like this. If people are falling into a river, there is, of course, value and necessity to throwing in life preservers, sending ambulances to respond. It might even be prudent to build rafts or fund more ambulances so response times are faster, or we might even build hospitals closer to the river. But these are all reactive strategies. Pulling people to safety does not address the conditions that made them vulnerable to falling into the river in the first place. So how do we determine who is at greatest risk? Can we identify and address these risk factors to prevent some people from falling in? Can we more effectively address some of the societal problems that put people at greater risk? Next slide, please. This is the governance model for the plan. Over 70 partners participated in this process and continue to serve on the advisory committee, including Bruce and Grey counties, member municipalities, police services and police service boards, health, education, community services, and other agencies working across both counties. Next slide, please. So how did community safety and well-being planning start? Under the Community and Safety Policing Act, community safety and well-being plans were legislated for all municipalities in Ontario. The Ministry of the Solicitor General has identified some of the benefits as an increased understanding of risks, enhanced communication and collaboration, an increased coordination and access to services, and finally, that reduced reliance on incident responses. Next slide, please. For your reference, I've included links to the plan, which includes community survey results and data gathering, identification of areas of priority, and a broader discussion of the process and background of planning. Also, the indicator report, which is the data framework, including key indicators from public health, emergency department, and police services data, 211 call trends, income, and employment data, among others. Next slide, please. When issues are referred to community safety and well-being, we are creating a framework to address them by referring the issue to the appropriate community agency or action table to leverage existing work that's already happening in the community by bringing groups together to collaborate, or addressing gaps and needs through support or advocacy, such as a letter of support for a project, initiative, or funding application, or exploring opportunities for future research. Next slide, please. Where possible, action tables aligning with our top priority areas are existing organizations or collaborations. The Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy is the action table for addictions and substance use. The Poverty Task Force is the action table for poverty and income. The Homelessness Response Table is the action table for housing and homelessness. The Mental Health Action Table is in development, and we've recently established a Crime Prevention Action Table, which is bringing together representatives from community agencies, police services, and members of the public. Next slide, please. We're also creating an assessment tool, which will help organizations identify and promote protective factors to help mitigate risks. This could include things like a policy for offering subsidized recreational programming to low-income families or investment in physician recruitment programs to ensure everyone has access to primary health care. Through a community safety and well-being lens, we're also looking at things like whose input is considered and how community outreach is undertaken. This tool will help ensure that key questions about protective and risk factors are part of the decision-making process. Next slide, please. A situation table is a risk intervention model that was restarted in Grey Bruce in mid-2021 under the purview of community safety and well-being. We have representatives from over 20 agencies across Grey and Bruce who meet weekly to present high-risk situations for discussion, determine appropriate supports needed for an intervention, and respond within 48 hours. This process does not take the place of ongoing case management or long-term support, but is designed to avert a crisis. Next slide, please. We had 27 situations presented in 2022. We've had 5 so far in 2023. The expertise of those sitting at the table is used to determine if a situation meets the criteria for acutely elevated risk. This means that chronic conditions have accumulated to a point of crisis, or new circumstances have increased the risk of harm or victimization. And one agency does not have the resources alone to respond to the situation, so they bring it to the situation table. Determining acutely elevated risk is a judgment call. The group votes to determine if the situation meets this criteria, and agencies work together to determine an appropriate response to address immediate needs. This model depends on trust, collaboration, and strong working relationships between those at the table. Next slide, please. Data from the situation table helps us identify top risk factors that make people vulnerable to crisis and agencies that are most frequently offering assistance. We may also eventually be able to compare our data with other areas across Ontario, which might help us better understand the unique approaches to risk mitigation in rural communities. The top 3 services mobilized in 2022 were related to housing, addictions, and mental health supports. Data from other situation tables and research on this approach suggest that the long-term benefits include a decrease in emergency department visits and police responses, an increase in collaboration between agencies. This is one strategy through which we're bringing together resources and generating solutions to help avoid potential crises. Next slide, please. In the last year, we've focused efforts on branding, building a new website, creating social media templates, and creating a short summary of goals and activities. With these tools, we're continuing to work towards educating the community about the relationship between upstream prevention and a decrease in crime and victimization. Next slide, please. The key to successful community safety and well-being is working together, using the expertise and experience of different sectors to target root causes of complex issues, collaborating to ensure that everyone has access to the resources they need to thrive in our communities. We want to mitigate risks and address needs before they require reactive responses, and continue to build strong communities where everyone feels a sense of safety and belonging. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, and I will turn to all of council here. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they would like to make? Seeing none, I will thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation and excellent work. It's good to see that moving forward as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So next we're on to TC Energy, the Meaford Pump Storage Project. Welcome Herb Shields, the External Engagement Team Lead of TC Energy.
Excellent. Thank you for having me this evening. This presentation online and on the screens is a similar presentation that TC Energy has provided to other municipalities in the County of Grey, as well as the County of Grey itself. So I'll be providing the same information that all the other municipalities have been provided, but I do have maybe some verbal updates since the last time I provided this presentation in December and January of this year. Next slide, please. So pump storage, what is pump storage and why is TC Energy doing it? So essentially TC Energy wants to build Canada's largest battery, but instead of using nickel or lithium or lead, what we want to use is water and gravity to store electricity, deploy that electricity when Ontario needs it, and then to continue to redo that cycle for multiple decades to come. Why TC Energy wants to do this project is that Ontario and other jurisdictions across North America are facing an energy transition where we are decarbonizing everything from our electrical grid to our transportation networks to our industry. And that transition is going to require a vast amount of new electricity that will be generated as well as a brand new energy grid that'll have to be resilient to climate change issues and resilient to that surging power that's going to be going through that network that has been unprecedented since its development. So consider it this grid scale battery an insurance policy against that fluctuation in energy demands going forward, as well as transitioning off carbon-based and fossil-based energy generation. Next slide. So this is the latest design of what this pump storage facility would be looking like in Meaford. So on your screen here, you'll see the Department of National Defense lands in Meaford, the Meaford Tank Range. That is outlined in red, and this facility will be sitting on D&D property. You'll see at the top of the escarpment an artificial reservoir. So this will be a completely artificial reservoir separated from any existing groundwater, existing water sources. This will be completely separate. You'll have an underground facility, a powerhouse and penstock. That'll be about 120 to 150 meters below the surface. And then about 3 kilometers from the bottom of that reservoir into Georgian Bay is a series of tunneling. About 12 meters in diameter, so about larger than the size of this room, would be going from that Penn powerhouse underground, continuing to be underground into Georgian Bay. We're about 800 meters into deep water. We'll have a tunneling system, again, that goes into a loop. And this loop system would be, again, about 10 meters below the surface, below the lake bed surface. And then sticking up from the lake bed will be about 20 risers sticking up from this tunneling system, and that will be our inlet outlet technology, which would be bringing water in, and then also that same riser system would be then dispersing water out from from the system. I do want to stress that this is conceptual only, and this concept has been driven by public feedback that we received from Meaford and as well as the Indigenous nations. And we continue to provide and refine this design based on that kind of feedback. Next slide. People have asked why Meaford and why now and why here. So you'll see here the overall kind of location, and this provides kind of the stars had to align for this particular location and site to be selected. So one, as you can see, there's lots of water in Georgian Bay, so that's one good thing to have. The Niagara Escarpment provides that elevation difference, so we can generate that kind of electricity with the velocity. 2, it's access to Southern Ontario and to energy markets. So as you can see, it's close to Barrie, it's close to Southern Ontario and the GTA. So that power can be efficiently transferred and used in those large markets. And then lastly, with Department of National Defense lands, we're able to avoid taking up private property, especially very nice lakefront property across Georgian Bay, and then work with Department of National Defense on previously taken up lands and disturbed lands, so we can minimize that private property impacts as much as possible. Next slide. So once we do generate power, we need to export it. So again, the feedback we received from residents is to look at ways to minimize aesthetic impacts, minimize land impacts. So we've been looking at a lake bed transmission line route for this pump storage facility. So you'll see here on your screen about a 50-kilometer or so buried cable line that would be going from Meaford to Wasaga Beach, the very west end of Wasaga Beach, where we have secured property. And from there, continuing to be buried from Wasaga Beach to Stayner. In Stayner, there's a transformer station, a Hydro One facility, where we would have a switch yard so that power then can go onto the Hydro One network. And then the existing Hydro One corridors between Stayner and ESSA would be upgraded in order to take on this additional property. Next slide. So this is another kind of cutaway of what the facility will be looking like. So as I've mentioned, everything is underground based on the feedback we received from the public. People had concerns about impacts to the shoreline, impacts to the aesthetic impact of this project, and then impacts to fish and fish habitat as well. So our entire design has been to address those particular kind of concerns. Next slide. People have asked, what is this project going to be looking like during construction, and what is actually happening underground? So you'll see here pictures of samples of what this project will probably look like underground. So this is a tunneling system that we'd want to replicate here in Georgian Bay, and this comes from Ashbridges Bay, which is part of Toronto. So the City of Toronto's wastewater department has just is in the middle of construction of a wastewater treatment and export facility called Ashbridges Bay, where they're using tunneling systems to go from City of Toronto into Lake Ontario to disperse of treated wastewater from the City of Toronto. So we want to use that same tunneling and construction technique for Meaford. So as you can see here, the tunnels are about 12 meters or so in diameter, and you'll see here then a series of concrete precast blocks that create the foundation and structure for that tunneling system, and then a series of cables and piping to accommodate that water and that activity. So as you can see here, like the tunnels are large enough for small vehicles and people to easily maneuver for ongoing maintenance. Next slide. And then on the water. So again, to install these risers, about 20 risers into this tunneling system, we're proposing a same construction technique that City of Toronto has undertaken. And that is to have temporary platforms in the water, where then we would install sleeves. So these sleeves would then have the water pumped out of them, so it's completely isolated from the rest of like the aquatic system. And then we would drill down into like the lake bed, into our tunneling system to attach those risers, ensure those risers are secure, remove those sleeves, and then continue on that process throughout the construction technique. So at the end of the day, these sleeves would be removed, those platforms would be removed, and then nothing would be visible at the water. Next slide. And so timing. Nothing has been filed regarding this project. We are going to begin a federal impact assessment process this year. This will be coordinated with class environmental assessments from the province of Ontario, as well as then a series of permits we'll have to secure, probably from the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority, Ministry of Natural Resources, from the municipality of Meaford. So all that has yet to begin. We're anticipating about a 3-year regulatory review process with multiple rounds of consultation. And within each of those rounds, there'll be opportunities for feedback from municipalities, from Indigenous nations, and from the public. So we have yet to begin that, but we're going to be beginning that this year. Next slide. People have asked what's the size of this project, and this will be well over $4.5 billion project. This will be one of the largest private sector investments in the County of Grey. We are anticipating a peak workforce of about 1,000 construction workers. Our current estimates is roughly half of that workforce is already in Bruce, Grey, and Simcoe counties, as we consider that the local study area. The other half will be coming from other parts of Canada, and we are working with Meaford, with the County of Grey, to determine what is the best accommodation for like those temporary workers coming in. And we have already looked at hotel staff, temporary accommodation staff. That will probably not be appropriate. What we will probably be investigating is temporary worker accommodations, and then working especially closely with the municipality of Meaford to determine if that's an appropriate process and approach for accommodations. Next slide. Regardless of whether it's 1,000 or 500 workers or more, we will be investing local for like this project, and we have already started to do that right now. So we do have existing contracts with Mako Cahill in Owen Sound. We're in discussions now with Georgian College to accelerate like the work in trades and also other human and health services in order to accommodate this work, and then also retaining local engineering and environmental firms such as Hatch, which is based here in Ontario. Next slide. And the next couple of slides I'll kind of gloss over, but there has been a wide variety of support for this project, and they're coming from very different kind of fields. So from small business, such as the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, environmental groups, and also organized labor and Indigenous nations as well. Next couple of slides. and we'll go through like next slides. I'll conclude by saying our ask, I think, right now is to wait. We have a federal and provincial regulatory process that will begin later this year. We're anticipating all municipalities as well as Indigenous nations and interested groups will be participating in that process. We will have more information to provide to interested parties as that process unfolds. So our ask is to, if you have questions, please come to us. We do have regular coffee chats every Thursday at our office in Meaford, and everyone does come by from all walks of life to just have their questions answered, have some discussions about what this project entails, and so we're more than happy to provide those answers. So thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Does anyone on council have questions? Councillor Day, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm pleased you came in tonight. It's a project I've been watching and I'm always happy to learn more about it. I have been impressed by how you've responded to the community in Meaford and their concerns about water turbidity in the shoreline. One thing I might have just missed is impact to water temperature. The Great Lake water temperatures have been rising with climate change, and a lot of our native fish rely on cold temperatures. So as that reservoir water drains into Georgian Bay, is there any concern with the temperature change that might come from that? I'll let you answer that question if it's okay, Mayor Carlton, and then I have a second as well.
Yes, go ahead.
Excellent. So through the chair, many nations and environmental groups have asked, and fishermen have also asked about like a water temperature, especially if that artificial reservoir is sitting. You're thinking of like solar radiation, kind of warming up that water. So we have been doing computer modeling as well as sampling of like the water, and our current understanding is we cannot measure the difference at this point. And the rationale for that is that water that will be taken from Georgian Bay, being pumped up to that reservoir and then discharged, that cycle is going to be lasting less than 24 hours. So in less than a 24-hour period, and again, comparing it to like the hottest day, the hottest week that is on record, and even extrapolating from that given kind of climate change, the computer modeling has indicated that they cannot measure like the substantial difference in water temperature, only because that water is just not sitting long enough in order to absorb that amount of solar radiation needed for that warmth. However, that doesn't mean that it will not happen. So that's why we continue to do water sampling, computer modeling, as well as having the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation do their own independent environmental reviews.
Excellent, thank you. My second question is about the next generation. I do very much perceive a need for this within the next 10 years to start shifting to carbon neutral forms of energy, which this is an excellent example of an alternative form of energy that's been used around the world successfully. And what I'm curious about is all infrastructure ages out eventually, or needs to be repaired or replaced or shut down. And is there thinking about cradle to grave planning with this project?
Yes, through the chair. So as we are anticipating, and we would do this regardless, but we are anticipating that as part of our requirements from federal and provincial regulators, a life cycle approach to this project will be required, whether it's from environmental monitoring as well as operational requirements, including safety and maintenance. So we are going to be looking at the best practices from around the world, including Canada. Canada does have one of the best regulations and requirements for hydroelectric dams and hydro facilities in the world. And our comparison would be that this would be equivalent to, say, like a very large hydroelectric kind of dam facility. So with proper maintenance, proper design, and ongoing operations, hydroelectric dams can last for multiple decades. One example I've had in coffee chats is that if you looked at like the Surratt and Beck facilities in Niagara Falls, they started to be built over a century ago. There is a reservoir facility in Niagara Falls just right by the Queenston-Lewiston Bridge, the Surratt and Beck 3. It's a pump storage facility there. That was started to be built in 1957. It was completed in 1962. In 2016, Ontario Power Generation put in a few $1 million for upgrades, and they said that will continue to be in operation for another 50 years. So that's like the time scale of how long like these types of large civil infrastructure projects will last, and with rigorous maintenance and with diligent operation, we're expecting multiple decades of operation for this facility.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Scholz, go ahead.
Great presentation. I appreciate your time here. I'm not one to tell you how to do your presentation, but I think that you should give consideration as well to the families that have had to give up their land for that to be there for you guys to be able to consider doing what you're doing now. There were many families that had to give up their land during World War II for that facility to be built. Our family had to give up 300 acres for that as well. I can show you a picture of my great-grandfather on a Sherman tank, so that's kind of cool. But the next time you give this presentation, consider giving thanks and appreciation to those families that had to lose that land.
Thank you.
Councillor Winters, go ahead.
A great presentation. I appreciate that. It's very informative. But as I sit here, I mean, I have a civil engineering background and do a lot with land development, and I just hazard a guess to what the plan is to do with all the spoils from all that tunnel. I'm sitting here trying to comprehend the volume of fill material that's going to be generated from both the pond and the tunnels. Where do you anticipate that going?
Excellent question, Councillor, and through the chair. There will be surplus with this project. Our engineering teams, both in-house and external, they're trying to optimize the current designs now in order to minimize that kind of surplus. So, for example, when we excavate the artificial reservoir, again, using that existing surplus to do like the embankments, is an obvious thing that we'll have to do. Using that surplus in order to upgrade roads and pads in order for construction to take place will also be something that we'll be undertaking, as well as like the buried cable lines. Will require some aggregate to make sure that cable is then safe and secure and away from like from any aquatic or vessel kind of interactions. However, even taking in all those considerations, there will be surplus. So that's being considered now as we go out to tender for major contracting, is to determine how that surplus can be used, when it can be used, and can that surplus, depending on what quality it is, what kind it is, can that avoid or delay aggregate activities in the area? So can that avoid or even stop quarry expansions in the area if you can use this stuff because it has to be extracted already, but the quality and the quantity still have to be determined.
Thank you. And seeing no other questions, I will thank you, Mr. Shields, for your presentation, and we will move on here.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next is our consent agenda. Do any members wish to pull items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, the recommendation is that Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs adopt the consent agenda for information as circulated, and that all actions contained therein are hereby approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Scholz, Councillor Coburn. Any further discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Correspondence, we have none. Committee reports were at Committee of the Whole, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on March 8th, 2023 be adopted, including recommendations COW 2023-022 to COW 2023-029. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Scholz, Deputy Mayor Pringle, is there any discussion? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. For further discussion, I'd like to pull two items, 12.1.3 Community Improvement Committee, as well as 12.1.6 short-term rentals.
Okay, so we need to change that motion to reflect that those two items are being pulled. So I'm looking at the acting clerk.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would suggest that the motion be amended to read that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on March 8th, 2023 be adopted, less recommendations, or sorry, less items 12.1.3 and 12.1.6.
Okay, so the mover and seconder, are you okay with that revision? Okay, so I will call the question then. All in favor? That is carried. So now, are we going to those before we're going to discuss those items first?
Through you, Madam Mayor, you should take the vote on the recommendation that's on the floor and then proceed with considering the item separately.
I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. So then we will go to 12.1.3, the Community Improvement Plan.
Is it? Are you hearing me okay? Is it, you wanting?
I am. Just give me a minute. I'm just waiting for the clerk I want to make sure we're doing this in the right sequence here. So just bear with me a minute. So we're going to this one then, Madam Clerk? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mayor Carlson. Thank you to the rest of council and staff. I left a little confused after the Committee of the Whole meeting regarding the Community Improvement Plan Steering Committee. So a couple of questions, if you could clarify for us, Mayor Carlton. I don't ever recall us talking about the need for a Community Improvement Steering Committee. It just all of a sudden appeared as though I ought to have known that was a thing. And I'm sorry if I missed it previously, but I'm wondering where the notion has come from. That's my first question. And the second question has to do with the makeup of the committee.
Okay, okay, bear with us here.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, I believe Ms. Burnett is on the call and can probably speak to the history of the CIP program.
Okay, yes. Jen, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the steering committee is necessary to be able to represent the township, the different aspects of the township within the community improvement plan. So the focus is typically on economic development, and the consultants, JL Richards, with their experience, determined that a committee of approximately 5 members, a steering committee, would be appropriate. Sometimes when the committees are too large, then it's hard to be able to schedule everyone to attend the meeting, and you can run into some challenges with a larger committee. So in their experience, based on their assessment of the plan that they're going to create with Georgian Bluffs, a 5 was deemed appropriate.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, to our senior planner. I appreciate hearing the background of that. It just seemed to be. Am I okay to continue speaking? I'm just
yes, go ahead.
Okay, it just seemed to kind of creep up on us, and it's probably that I forgot that was a recommendation from the consultant. So thank you, Jen. I think this motion is just appointing myself and Mayor Carlton to that steering committee, but we did, and I'm fine with that. But we did talk about appointment or invitations to community members, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I did get the sense that we had already predetermined at least one of the committee members. And I went away, as I often do after committee of the whole, with some more thinking and some more processing and that sober second thought. And it still wasn't sitting right with me that we have determined who will sit on that committee. Is it not our practice typically to put that out to the community, put out a list of criteria regarding the types of folks we want to represent the community on our committees, and give folks a fair and equal chance to apply to sit on that community? Or committee rather. I just wasn't feeling right in hearing that we'd already decided who might be at that table already.
Madam Planner, do you have a response to that?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the recommendation was, it's typically an invitation, and the groups are identified based on the project. So it is, once the steering committee gets together, then there would be opportunity to have a discussion to see if additional representatives should be included. So if that's what council would like, then once that initial steering committee gets together, then that direction can be communicated to the consultants so that a wider representation of Georgian Bluffs community can be included in the creation of the community improvement plan.
And
Thank you, Jen.
I understand that, but what I'm not understanding is who had input into the initial folks being on that steering committee? Because I know I didn't as a councillor. So I'm sure the consultant isn't aware of who all of the players are in our community. So who did identify those folks as the initial members of the steering committee?
Councillor Coburn, I see the CAO is wanting to speak, and then Councillor Day as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think I'll invite Jen to provide response, and if I need to embellish, I will. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Madam Planner.
Thank you. So I believe, and the acting clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, that this isn't a committee of council. It's a steering committee, and it's for a project that has been approved by council. And so that's why the selection of the committee wasn't presented to council for consideration. Yeah, I'm not sure if the acting clerk or the CAO have any correction on that.
For you, Madam Mayor, I'll jump in, and I was going to make the distinction between a committee of council and what might be seen as a project steering committee. And a project steering committee is often put together by the project leads, by invitation, and it's people who will be affected by or benefit from. This is an incentive program too. So they would make recommendations. There might have been consultation too with the county, who funds the community improvement program as well. Thank you.
Before I go to Councillor Day, I will just comment that the county has given over the last 5 years $20,000 per year toward this program, and recently at our last council meeting at the county extended the time frame to allow all municipalities to get their community improvement plan in place. So that is part of it. I'll go to Councillor Day, and then I'll back to you, Councillor Coburn.
I'm still a little confused and just trying to sort things out, because from what I understand, as councillors, a big part of our job is to provide direction to staff, and then you follow through and make things happen. And with a community improvement plan, who sits on the committee feels like a really key part of what decisions the committee will make. So I don't we haven't been, as far as I know, we haven't been informed about which community members have been invited. And I know we have someone from the farm community, and just like all big categories, there are many people within that community who have different perspectives on farming and ecology and business. And I'm just feeling like some more information, or some of Councillor Colburn's concerns are ones that I have been sharing about understanding this process and who sits on the committee. And I also do highly respect your role as staff and what falls in your purview. And I'm just trying to figure out those boundaries. But yeah, I'm left with questions about who has been invited and what values and long-term visions they have that they'll bring to this committee. Thank you.
So Councillor Coburn, I'll go to you and then we'll go back to staff, I think, for some responses there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Carlton, and through you to staff. I think Councillor Day has said it well. If the members have already been selected and have agreed to sit on the committee, can you make that announcement at the meeting today so that we all know who's going to be sitting on that committee?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, I don't have the information at my fingertips. If council so wishes, we will follow up with the consultant and get more information for council.
Just to comment on my part, I would think as we work through this plan, the people that we call on as resources to help with the plan may change as we work our way through it. So the ones who are maybe invited to sit on the committee to start with may not necessarily be there throughout the whole thing. That may change.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I think again, the distinction between this being a committee of council and appointed by council and this being a project steering committee is a big distinction. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other comments, then I think we will move on from that one to the 12.1.6. Oh, I see the clerk.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we do have to take the vote on this motion.
So we separated that one out. We don't actually have a motion on that though at this point, do we? So it would be just to accept. The motion would be to I'll let you go ahead.
That's okay. Through you, Madam Mayor. So because it was a recommendation of Committee of the Whole and we have pulled it from the consent agenda, we do now need to vote on that motion as it was presented to Committee of the Whole.
So we didn't actually pull it from consent agenda. We pulled it out of community
from committee of the whole. Yeah. Yes.
So, Madam Mayor, I think what the clerk is looking for is for you to approve the minutes of that meeting. You pulled it out as a separate item to discuss.
So we still have one more though that we've pulled. Do we need to then pass each one individually?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor.
I need now then a motion by someone on council to accept that motion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the motion that was presented to Committee of the Whole was that report PL 2023-12 be received for information and that Councillor Kathy Moore Coburn and Mayor Sue Carlton be appointed to the steering committee for the community improvement plan. So you need to have a mover and a seconder, and then you'll need to take the vote on that one separately.
Good. So if I could have a mover, Councillor Coburn and Councillor Day. Any other discussion on that? I will call the vote then. All in favor? That has carried. Okay, now we will move on to 12.1.6. And now I think I've figured out that that's the motion we need to make again after we've discussed this. Okay, got it. Yep. Okay, so let me read this one. That staff procure a short-term accommodation software and services package to assist the township in identifying and tracking activity in this market, and that a more proactive approach to enforcement of related bylaws be supported, and that staff be directed to hire one seasonal bylaw enforcement resource to support a more proactive approach to enforcement as outlined in this report, and that staff develop a focused communication and engagement campaign related to short-term accommodations in Georgian Bluffs as outlined in this report, and that staff hire one temporary resource to support such communication efforts, and that a budget impact of $90,000 be identified within budget 2023 to support the work related to short-term accommodation review, and that staff be directed to report back to council by the end of 2023 on the results of the program implemented during the spring and summer of 2023. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Schuldes, Deputy Mayor Pringle. All right. Discussion. I'll turn it over to you, Councillor Coburn, since you had asked to pull that one.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, and through you to my colleagues on council. I know one thing that can be a bit confusing for new councillors is the process by which we discuss items such as this at committee of the whole. And then it comes back to council, and we have this tendency to blanket approve everything we discussed at committee of the whole. But what that span of time between committee of the whole and the next council meeting does for us is A, it allows us to hear further from concerned ratepayers. And B, it allows us for that sober second thought that I referred to earlier. I wasn't having any sober second thoughts because I'm still having the same thoughts that I had last week when we discussed it, but I'm hoping some of you may have, given some of the correspondence and phone calls and the presentations that we have had this evening. While I don't disagree with either of the motions put before us for the short-term accommodations, so A, the nuisance bylaw, which again, I'm happy to see finally, and additional enforcement. And the first one being the additional staff and the software program to start tracking short-term accommodations. I don't have an issue with those. What I do have an issue with is us saying that we need more data. I don't think we need more data. We know we have these short-term rentals in our communities. We know that they're causing folks grief. They're causing our bylaw enforcement a lot of hours and time and cost. We know that we've seen a petition with almost 200 signatures on it saying that they want these facilities outrightly banned. I'm not suggesting we go that far right now, but I certainly think we need to find a better middle ground. I feel as though what we're saying to folks, what we said to them last year, over a year ago, I think it was, that we're going to act on this and we're going to do something for the coming visitor season of 2023. I don't feel like we're doing that with this proposal. I don't think we're doing enough. As I say, I'm not for an outright ban at this point in time. I don't think we need more data to tell us it's a problem. So I would like to move that we approve those motions as they are, but add an additional motion for adding the initiative for the registration process. I think we can start that with the software program and the additional staff and the prototypes in place, as we've seen, for example, at Grey Highlands. I think we can do a little bit more. I think we can identify where those spots are. I think we can ask them to register and pay an annual fee for this year at least. Grey Highlands is $300 for unhosted short-term rentals, nothing for hosted rentals or your traditional bed and breakfast. And they're notified using the software program to identify them. They're notified, they're given 45 days to register and pay. And following that, there are fines of up to $1,000 a day if they ignore the notice and don't register. I think this is the least that we can do for our permanent residents who have suffered for 2 or 3 summers now and the problem getting worse. So I'd like to make that motion. I'd also like to ask my fellow council colleagues, how would you feel if this was happening next door to you, your permanent home, the place that you call home and you live 365 days of the year, how would you feel? Thank you.
Councillor Day, go ahead.
I would like to take this opportunity to speak to the citizens who have come in tonight and to the staff and to council, as obviously we do for all council meetings, but especially given the number of people who have phoned or emailed or taken the time to come in tonight. I very much appreciate that. And my thinking 2 weeks ago was I was catching up on a budget meeting that I missed through illness, and I was still thinking about how busy our staff sounded. And this is for the folks sitting a little bit closer. I have spent my life working in jobs where the to-do list gets longer and the remuneration and time does not change at all. So I understand how it feels to add something to your list if you don't have the proper resources to do it, which is why I voted for the motion last time and not having an interim or a fee or registration fee for short-term accommodations. With those 2 weeks of sober second thought and some thinking about the other licensing programs we already have within the township of Georgian Bluffs, like the dog licensing program that Maria mentioned, it doesn't, to have an interim fee that would cover this year and recoup some of the cost from hiring the bylaw officer and buying the software. I've been thinking a lot and listening a lot, and I would be very curious to hear from some other folks this evening if how you feel about the STA motion as it stands at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Scholz, go ahead.
Councillor Coburn, you have hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree with you more in what you had just said. I would totally support the idea of a registry. I think that's at least something we could do at minimum, but as well, I would like to see a $1,500 surplus charge or surcharge being associated with that to set up. I would like to mirror Tiny Township. I said that last meeting. I'll say it again. I think as well, it's important to add that registered Airbnbs that should be here should also be required to have some sort of sewage and fire inspection. I'd like to reference what happened in Montreal. I don't know if anybody heard about that recently, but there was a Airbnb in Montreal that probably wasn't inspected for fire and had burned, and one person is dead, and there are 6 that have not been found yet. So I think it's important to note that if there's going to be an Airbnb short-term rental, however you would like to call it, they need to have fire inspected. They need to be sewer inspected. They should have a registry associated with the tax that doesn't burden the taxpayer for this $90,000 we're going to spend. And I think that it's important that we should have a tax for these STAs at 6%. I don't see that would be unreasonable to ask for, and I think that it would help fund costs for the taxpayers as well in the future.
So any comments from Deputy Mayor Pringle? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Carlton. I'm definitely not in disagreement with everything that Councillor Coburn or Councillor Scholz have said. I'm in 100% agreement with moving forward with registration and stuff too. My concern is, I'm going to turn it over to the CEO and put her on the spot here, but what kind of a timeline or what kind of effect would that take on just to set up just a registry fee situation that we could get implemented for this year, along with the follow-up of what we're doing now?
So thank you for the question. And I think we've heard more in the last month from our community, honestly, as staff, than we've heard for a long time on this issue. So I do appreciate that folks have been impacted by behavior and attitudes that aren't what we want in Georgian Bluffs. The challenge that we have as staff is, if I go back to the direction that we were given in 2022 by previous council, it was to come back with data on the short-term accommodation activity, which we've done. We've told you that we're struggling. I appreciate what Councillor Coburn's saying. We know there's an issue, but we don't know the distinct properties. We don't know the players. We don't know the breadth of this. So to be able to say what are the resources we need ongoing, we have work to do. The second thing we were asked to do was make recommendations to effectively address the issues that we were hearing about. So it was noise, it was property standards, It was parking issues. It was those kinds of things. We've come back with some recommendations on that. If at that time the recommendation was come back with a full-blown implementable licensing program, we would have come back with additional resources that are needed to do that. So Councillor Scholdice, you've indicated we need building officials time. We need fire department time. We need the police, you know, if we're going into that full-blown licensing program. I appreciate that you've looked at other townships, and so have we. Two things we've heard clearly. There is not a one-size-fits-all that works in every township. Do not shortchange your community, the entire community, on consultation. And I believe this council is committed to community consultation. And we need to get it right. In terms of a registration program, I mean, if that is something that you want us to look into, I would be coming back with more information. Licensing programs or registration programs take administrative resources too. We haven't asked you for any administrative resources. That will be an additional ask potentially. Or we're going to the software and service provider company and stepping up. We bought their, or we're talking about buying their basic level of service. It might be that we're looking at paying them a lot more money, but it's not going to come free. And so our preference would have been full community consultation, understanding how big the issue is and where the distinct properties are, and the nuisance bylaw and proactive enforcement for 2023. And we come back at the end of the calendar year. I mean, if you want to amend that last line in the recommendation, that it's not just that we report back on the activities of 2023, that we come back with a licensing, what could be a licensing program, that would be my recommendation, folks, is give us the time to do it properly and based on the feedback that we've heard. I mean, I appreciate that we want to have a user pay system. I'm a taxpayer in Georgian Bluffs too, so I think that can be our future direction. But what we've heard from other communities is you don't just pick somebody's program off the shelf and put it in the Georgian Bluffs context. The other thing that we would have done had the direction in 2022 been come back with a full-blown implementable licensing program is we would have made sure we've had legal advice. We would have made sure that we've got the policies in place that that are required for some of these things. We would have made sure we have a defendable fee. But that wasn't the direction in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, and I do appreciate your comments, Cynthia, and I do understand the challenges of staffing and resources. Now is not a bad time for us to talk about resources since we haven't approved the budget yet, and I do see council's. I do appreciate our role in setting our priorities and our strategic direction. So if that's how we wish to spend our additional money, perhaps we need to think about that. I know you've said, CAO Fletcher, that we need to identify the distinct properties. It's my understanding that that's what this software program will do for us. Mm-hmm. So is it conceivable that as those properties are identified, that can spearhead the notification that goes out? I'm imagining all of this is doable within the software program itself. I know you said it had a lot of capabilities. I'm not sure what all of them are, but if that notice can be an immediate send to an identified distinct property, then then it's just a matter of 45 days, I believe, is Grey Highlands, whereby they have to submit their fee, and we have electronically for dog tags, and you know, we have garbage tags and building permits and all of the rest of it. So I'm not trying to be a thorn in your side. I hope I'm not coming across that way, but I just want to make sure we have left no rock unturned here.
Sure.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, please, my comments are not intended to say anybody's being a thorn in the side. This is a big issue for our township. This is a whole new line of business for us to get into. And this is a whole new level of service, and we need to tackle it. But I would like to tackle it properly. So Councillor Coburn, I guess if there is a want for council to have more information, my comment would be some of those other municipalities have different policies in place. I'm not sure that we do. Even our zoning bylaw defines a dwelling differently than some others. It's something that we will update with our update of the OP and our zoning bylaw. There are things that foundational pieces that we need to be in place. It's not as simple as sending out a notice and collecting money. And we still need the people or the service to send out the notices and collect the money. So that's not part of what we're procuring from the software service. It's software, and they will identify individual properties and they will track activity. If it's a different level of service that we're looking for, that's what we intended to bring back at that November report to you. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. So if I could comment here, sorry, I see your hand up again, Councillor Coburn. If I could just make a comment. My thought on this motion as it is right now, I guess my thought was that if we have that software that then tells us exactly where these properties are, then we can start with some kind of registration or licensing. But I don't think we're even at a point of starting a registration process because we don't know where all these properties are. And we can maybe advertise that we're going to ask people to do this, but I'd almost guarantee that the ones that are going to willingly register are already compliant. My thought is the ones that aren't compliant are going to avoid the issue. So I think we need to be able to track and get that data in place first before we can ask staff to start working on a registration process. And also so that council can see, are we talking 5 properties in the municipality that are an issue, or are we talking 25 or 125? We don't have any idea of what those numbers are yet. And in my mind, that was the purpose of getting started with the software and kind of some beginning steps so that we would know what our next steps would be and make sure that the next steps and policies we put in place fit our municipality. And I'll go to the CAO and then back to you, Councillor Coburn.
The only other thing I'd add, and I might invite our treasurer if she wants to comment, is we would normally put a bit of review behind a fee analysis and have something defendable. I mean, I appreciate that Collingwood has a fee or Blue Mountains has a fee or another in Toronto has a fee, but I'm not sure that we know that fits the Georgian Bluffs context. And so I'm all for the direction that council's talking about in terms of registration, recouping costs, that sort of thing. It's not resistance to that. It's that I'm not sure we have the processes in place, or we would have a defendable fee at this point.
Thank you, Madam CAO. Councillor Coburn?
I have a million things I want to say. In terms of a defendable fee, I don't even really know what that means, except to say that if other neighboring municipalities have defendable fees, I can't imagine if ours was in line with that, how it could be not defendable. So I have to say I'm a bit confused about that. I did want to make one remark, and this is perhaps a bit personal, and normally I don't get personal when it comes to council business, but Mayor Carleton, you said we don't know if it's 5 properties causing a problem or 105, and that most of them are compliant. I was a short-term rental owner. I had a property in the middle of a residential area on the water in a neighboring municipality, and I was the most responsible host ever. I laminated the rules. I met with the folks. We went over them. There were fees if people didn't follow the rules, fines that they had to pay through the rental organization. I, as an owner, a property owner and a short-term rental host, followed all the rules. But that didn't stop some groups coming with 20 people and 6 cars and my mattresses outside and pillows in the bush and the dogs running through the screen doors and all of the rest of it. It doesn't matter if you're a good person and you set down the rules and you follow things by the book. Every short-term rental has the capacity to be a problem because you just don't have control when you're not there. So I did want to make that clear. My short-term rental business lasted a hot minute because I could see that it was bothering my lovely valued neighbors, and I did not want to be that person in the community that was causing my neighbors who were permanently living there a problem. So I pulled the plug on that. So I guess the point is that I'm trying to make is that you can be a responsible property owner and still create these issues for the folks living beside you. So if I may, I'd like to go back to the nuisance bylaw, and I know I can be a dog with a bone, but I'm not going to stop being a dog with a bone. When we've heard about by law enforcement and their struggles to make a fine fit or follow through with a violation, we have been told time and time again that bylaw is a difficult thing and that enforcement is a difficult thing, and we prefer an educational approach, and we want to give folks a second chance, and it seems and we can only do so much, and then it goes to the court, and I'm not even sure what that means. It goes to the courts. I'm concerned. We have this beautiful nuisance bylaw that I'm happy to see. Do not get me wrong. I'm concerned that the implementation of such a bylaw might be a little more difficult. My concern is that we're going to put these folks through these trials and tribulations for yet another summer that they don't deserve. So I guess I'm asking, how sure are we that this nuisance bylaw is going to be enforceable and effective?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's part and parcel in a whole bunch of things. So the communication and education, what bylaw enforcement, the police, anybody who is doing an enforcement role, they need to know at the time something's happening. Telling us about it a day later, 2 days later, they have to have evidence or proof that something is in violation. There is a process. I know, Councillor Coburn, what you're talking about is bylaw enforcement is usually about bringing people into compliance. And it's a judgment call, and it's a fine balance. If you go too heavy-handed the first time around, you'll be criticized. It's a no-win situation sometimes. The other thing is, though, the nuisance bylaw gives a lot more teeth to the bylaw enforcement officer in terms of the comments about things going off to the courts. There's certain things that we can do as municipal enforcement. There's certain things that the police officers have authority over. But ultimately, if we're going after major fines or ability to operate what they're doing, then it becomes a court matter. We have to work with the courts.
Thank you. And Councillor Day?
It's clear that citizens can contact Georgian Bluffs through the website if they have a concern about neighboring Airbnb or other short-term accommodation. And also, you've just talked about how it's great to report a problem when it's happening as opposed to later. Is there a way for folks, should they call the police if there's an Airbnb that is not compliant? I'm just imagining that our bylaw officer is not available 24 hours a day. So how should they best deal with an incident that's happening in the evening?
So through you, that's why the additional resource is so that we can schedule people. I mean, that's the whole idea of focusing on the areas once we understand where the short-term accommodations are. So one, we know the areas that we need to focus on. The additional resource plus our full-time bylaw enforcement, we can schedule them on Friday nights, on the weekend, that sort of thing. So they are a resource. Absolutely, if somebody feels something's going on and it's unsafe, they can call the police as well. So, and the other thing is that I don't want to get lost is traditionally we've had a reactionary approach to bylaw enforcement. We have to wait for a complaint. Now, council through this is endorsing a much more proactive approach.
And thank you. That's a really great answer. And just to be super clear, is there a way for the community to contact the bylaw officer directly in the moment when something is happening in their neighborhood?
We will make sure that as part of that community engagement and communication program that it's very clear how you get a hold of folks.
Thank you.
I think what the CAO is referencing as well on the proactive basis is that once we know where some of the problems are, that bylaw person could just go for a tour by that place just to double check and make sure that they're kind of staying on top of those issues, maybe trying to get ahead of those issues as well. Councillor Coburn and Councillor Winters then.
So my understanding of the button that used to be called Report a Concern, which is now Contact GB on our website, is monitored 24/7. It's triaged so that if something needs to be dealt with immediately, it will be. So I guess my question is as a practical example, if someone is having a party next door and the noise is excessive and it's disturbing the peace of the folks living next door, and they submit something through Contact GB, by the time they get out there, the party may not be happening any longer, and yet is that really a police matter? So this is my concern, right? Are these the kinds of things that are going to fall between the cracks, or how can that best be handled?
Through you, Councillor Coburn, as I said, if let's just use the example, we anticipate it's weekends that are going to be the issue. We schedule bylaw enforcement on weekends. They have their phone with them. If something goes through Contact GB, it can be directed to that phone immediately. They're not sitting here at the township office when they're doing bylaw enforcement. They're out and about in our community. So our intention would be the response time could be quite quick.
And sorry, Madam Mayor, if I may just follow up. Please understand that when folks rent one of these facilities for a week in July or August, it doesn't matter to them if it's Friday night or Saturday night or Tuesday night. That's their vacation. And so if we're sending folks out just on Saturdays and Sundays, we're going to miss a lot of the bylaw infractions during the week that someone's renting it and on holidays. So I'm sure that, will be an understanding as time goes along.
Sure.
But when we talk about additional resources on weekends, it doesn't matter to renters if the party is on a Tuesday or Saturday, just to be clear.
For you, Madam Mayor, no, fair enough. And I wasn't intending that the only time that there would be bylaw enforcement. I was just using that as an example. Thank you.
Councillor Winters, over to you.
You knew I was sitting here being really quiet, right? And I support every one of the councillor members' concerns and their comments tonight. And having been in Cynthia's position, I understand where she's at as well. But I do have an issue with short-term rental accommodations and putting it off another year. I really think that we as a council, if we are, and I think from what I'm seeing is united of licensing short-term rental accommodations, is you start a registration program in 2023. And maybe it's a voluntary registration, which is going to give you the data. And what you do is you actually present that we as Georgian Bluffs Council believe there should be 100 or 200 or whatever that number is, maximum short-term accommodation rentals within the municipality. And when we hit that number, we're not going to license anymore. They'll come out of the woodwork. And I've seen other municipalities do that as well. And then the dollar value, as a taxpayer, I don't like spending $90,000, but it's not the dollar value today that really irks me. I mean, if it's a $50 registration for now, it's something. But I think if we can organize some sort of voluntary registration, July 1st, August 1st, that's going to give us the data. That's going to be able to give us the what we need to allocate our forces and our bylaw enforcement to focus on those areas. It's a nightmare for staff to impose, but I think we're missing that, and we're going to wait another year and we're still going to have the same situation. I personally wouldn't want to live beside a short-term accommodation. I feel for the people that have those issues, and I've seen it. I deal with every municipality in Grey and Bruce. I see the septic issues. I see what's going on. I see the abuse. I see the parking, and I really think we need to address it sooner than later.
Thank you, Madam CAO. Go ahead.
So no, and I appreciate the comments. I would just like to clarify, I'm a bit concerned if there is with the comment that we're deferring it for another year. I am also concerned that people see the licensing piece of paper as the be all and end all. I mean, that the piece of paper is not dealing with the behavior, the attitude, and the impacts. It is, I appreciate that that's a way for us to recoup money, but I do not want the community to think that this council is deferring something for another year. Everything that we've talked about in this recommendation is engaging, education, getting out and talking to our community, enforcement, understanding how big is. This is a big step forward into a new business line for this township. So I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Councillor Winters?
Sorry, and I agree with that as well, but after seeing that presentation on the community wellness plan where it says let's be proactive, if we get a voluntary registration, that'll bring some of them up front. Didn't say it was a license, I said it's a registration, and I think we need to be very proactive with this with our community and say we are heading for a licensing, and there will be certain rules imposed, but we need to get an answer and an idea of what we have out there for volumes at this point in time.
Madam CAO, go ahead.
Perhaps, Madam Mayor, I think what I'm hearing from council is you're satisfied with that recommendation as it sits, but you want to do more, if I'm understanding correctly. And so I can't answer all of your questions around what a registration program may look like, or what resources may be needed, or what additional monies may be needed for that registration program. It could be minimal, it could be a lot. I think if that's the want, that you want to do more than what staff has recommended, then my recommendation would be that you direct us to come back with more information on what that registration program for 2023 might look like.
I'm looking around and seeing some nods here. Councillor Coburn?
I'm caught between wanting to do something as Councillor Winters is suggesting, and trying to be practical. I'm always hesitant in directing staff to bring back more information, and I know that probably sounds wrong of me, but it feels like that's what we do when we want to kick the can down the road a bit further. I don't want to kick the can down the road a bit further. Can we find some way to make a voluntary registration at least possible, even by the fall of this year? It doesn't have to be, all the bells and whistles, but it is a start. As Councillor Winters has said, it does signal to folks that we're serious about this. And we're already moving in that direction. I personally don't need more information to know what that looks like any more than I need more information to know what our dog licensing program looks like. I know if you have a dog, you need to contact the municipality and get a license. I don't need to know where all the dogs are. I know they exist and I know they have to be licensed. So I would expect at least as much for a short-term rental. So in the efforts of trying to be to find some middle ground, can we move beyond getting more information and agree that we need some kind of registration process in place before the end of this year to be fine-tuned for 2024 or to become a full-fledged licensing system next year?
CAO Fletcher, go ahead.
I appreciate the council members' comments. I don't know if there's a financial impact to us doing that. And so that's my financial impact or a staff resourcing impact.
I think that's very valid. We have to know what that expense is going to be to the township. I don't disagree with getting things moving ahead, but I think because of budget, we need to know what this is going to cost us and who's actually going to have the time to do any of this. So I'm not against hearing back from staff with some recommendations on that. Councillor Coburn, I'll give you one more shot at this, and then I think we need to get moving on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm willing to concede to asking staff to bring more information back, Madam Mayor, as long as it is time specific and that we're looking at a reasonable time frame and not like an open time frame. I think we need to expect something back. Is a couple of months enough time? There should be lots of data out there in terms of the cost, just by consulting some of our neighbors who have done this kind of a program. I'm sure they have a rough idea. I just don't want us to say, staff, bring back information and we're still looking for it by December. And I don't mean to be trite, but I do want folks to believe that we are wanting this in a timely manner. It's not that we just want it. We want it quickly, if possible.
Thank you. And is there any more response from staff? CAO Fletcher, go ahead.
I heard of fall registration, so we would be back to you well before the fall. Let's say June.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Pringle, go ahead.
Yeah, just one final comment there. So I'm in agreement with trying to move this process forward to get registration set up, and I understand where the CAO and the staffing issues are coming from. For me right now, I think the biggest teeth we're going to have in this whole process is the nuisance bylaw and then somebody out there bylaw enforcing it. Again, we've always talked about bylaw enforcement, but we've never seemed to get the teeth in. So I'm going to really rely on the fact that that's where this is going to go. And we are going to put a dent in some of this that's going on out there. Like, I feel bad for, the Jones family out there and Mrs. Wernicke and the Correa, the folks out there. That's just the three that we have here tonight, right? There's lots more out there. And again, I personally don't want them beside my place either. So if we're going to go down that road of hiring somebody to be a bylaw person, to be out there, have a nuisance bylaw, I want us to see some teeth in it. I want to see this happen. I get we want to have our, get to a registry, and that will take time. I understand that. I understand we need the time, but let's put the teeth in it where we can right now.
Councillor Day, go ahead.
I just want to end my contribution to this conversation with two thoughts. One is that I also live near a short-term accommodation, and they're great. There are those folks out there who do it well, and they have someone on site to manage things should they arise. So there are, as always, folks out there who do things better than others and worse than others. And just in case the people here tonight or listening online weren't listening to the last meeting where we talked about this issue, we did talk about how the complaints that came in already in 2022 will be taken into consideration by the bylaw officer for the upcoming season. So keep telling us where there are telling the staff where there are problem areas, and also know we've heard, we know that Balmy Beach and Oxenden are two places where there's concerns already.
Thank you, everyone. And to everyone who is here, I can reiterate the fact I wouldn't want to live next to one of these either. I have lived next to one for years. It has been well looked after and never been an issue. So there's those, but I also know there's the ones with issues. We do feel for you, and we are going to work forward on this. And together, council and staff, we'll work on it this year and hopefully have some really good rules ready to implement totally next year, but we'll do what we can to get through this year as well. So I think it's time we moved on, or we'll be on this topic all evening. So thank you, everyone, for your comments. CEO Fletcher.
I think the clerk is just going to walk us through the adoption of what you see on your sheet and then the new direction to staff.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would recommend that this motion be amended to include a line that speaks to the staff direction that you've alluded to. It could read that staff be directed to bring back a report with further information regarding a registration program for short-term rentals in the township of Georgian Bluffs at a meeting in June 2023.
Okay. I now don't even remember who moved and seconded this one. So somebody on staff could refresh my mind.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just procedurally as well, this is an amendment, so you would have to have a separate mover and second, sorry, I'm not feeling like myself.
It. That's okay. Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder on the amended motion. So Councillor Winters, Councillor Schuldeis, there's no further discussion on that one. I will call the vote on the amended motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Sorry, can I go back to all in favor? Is everyone in favor of that? Okay, thank you. That's carried. And then we'll go back to the main motion and I will call the vote on that one now as well. So all in favor of the amended motion or of the main motion as amended. And any opposed? Okay, thank you. That's carried. So we are on now to, I think I had it here. 12.2, the Police Services Board. So what we have coming there is the same thing we had last year about the conference registration and accommodations for the members of the Police Services Board who will be going to the conference. The recommendation there is that council approve the conference fees for members to attend the 2023 OAPSB conference beyond the $500 allocation. And just as some explanation there, as conferences are going back to being virtual, conference costs are going up. And at this point, for the two members to go to that Police Services Board, the cost over and above the $500, I think they were getting a bill for $750 each. I don't think our volunteers from the public should have to pay to go and represent us and bring information back to us. So that is the reason for having that recommendation there. And it's actually just a repeat of one we did a year ago. So could I have a mover and seconder on that one? Councillor Winters, Councillor Schuldeis. Any discussion or questions on that one? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That has carried. Thank you. And just give me a minute to get back to this agenda and figure out, we are over to staff reports. So the recommendation that council waive tower policy PLNG-006-10 requirement for a public meeting, given that federal requirements are in place to ensure appropriate public consultation, and that council direct the senior planner to issue a letter of concurrence to Shared Tower Inc. for a proposed 37-meter tripole tower at 441048 Elm Street, Wyerton, Ontario. Could I have a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor, please? Councillor Day, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Are there any questions, or is someone going to speak to this first? I see our senior planner is still on here. Were you speaking to this tonight, Jen, or? Oh, Ben, sorry.
Ben.
Sorry, Jen. Ben's sitting right here in front of me and I wasn't paying attention. Okay, go ahead, Ben.
So an overview. So Share Tower is looking to, oh, it's on. Okay, perfect. I couldn't see it there. So Share Tower is looking to construct a 37-meter tripole tower at 441048 Elm Street in Georgian Bluffs, but in close proximity to Wyerton there. And its proposed intent is to strengthen the telecommunications within the Wyerton area. The federal government, through the Innovation, Science and Economic Development of Canada, is responsible for the final regulatory decision to approve the location of the tower. However, the Township of Georgian Bluffs does have a procedure in place to ensure public consultation is held in regard to location and placement of the tower. The policy was written in 2010 and is no longer aligned with federal government requirements regarding consultation for communication towers. Council directed staff in 2022 to revise the tower policy PLNG-006-10, and while the new policy is currently being drafted, it was not in effect for this application. Staff recommend waiving the requirement to host a public meeting for the proposed application as policy PLNG-006-10 is out of date and is currently under revision. Public consultation occurred in compliance with the ISED requirement, and the township circulated the notice to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. And notice was posted on the property as well as the township's website, and as well was published in the Wyerton Echo and Owen Sound Sun Times on February 21st of 2023, as well as on February 28th of 2023. In conclusion, the federal government of Canada is responsible for the final regulatory decision and the approval of the tower's location. However, a letter of concurrence is needed from council to direct the senior planner to complete. The applicant is here this evening, and if council has any questions, they would be happy to address those. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. And Councillor Day, you had a question?
I do have a question. I see that Transport Canada and NAV Canada will be consulted as part of the process. I'm curious, I don't know how this works. I'm wondering if the Wyerton Airport also is consulted on this project as a really logical stakeholder in the public's mind from the folks who sent in letters.
Thank you. Yes, thank you to everyone here. Yes, actually, the airport was one of the properties that was being considered to host the tower. However, the elevation and the height requirements that would be required didn't meet with the carriers, so they are aware of the tower. NAV Canada as well as Transport Canada has been notified, and that is part of the application process where we need to notify them of the proposal, and they are to advise of any lights or painting that is required.
And the Wyerton Airport itself doesn't need to provide commentary to you. They didn't express any concerns with pilot safety and airplane safety.
The proposed tower is below their required height for being within the vicinity of the tower and the airport. And then the final resting decision is with Transport and NAV Canada.
Okay. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I think I understand you to say that there has been notification of folks within a certain radius of where this tower will be. We're just, is the ask that we're waiving having some kind of public meeting or consultation at council? I just want us to be careful because I recall a similar type of tower going to be erected at a nearby municipality, and it really caused quite a stir amongst the folks living in that vicinity as it was going to impact what they felt was their view in the area. So I'm just not sure what it is that we're being asked to waive, and I want to be sure before I agree to that.
So through you, Madam Mayor, so the township here followed the ISED procedure in consultation, and the procedure states that you would notify all property owners within 3 times the tower's proposed height. However, that would equal, I believe, 111 meters. Township staff circulated the notice to all property owners within 120 meters of the proposed development, as well as was circulated on the township website, on the property, as well as the Wiarton Echo and Sun Times. And yep, so and as for the ISED, township followed the procedure that was set out in that, and in the procedure, it does not state directly to a public meeting as a requirement.
CEO Fletcher.
Thank you. And just to add to our planner's commentary, really the policy that we have needs to be updated. There's a redundancy in our policy that says we require public consultation. Well, the federal government requires public consultation. So it's really, we're waiving because we haven't updated the policy. Our new policy will actually remove that requirement and refer to the federal government's public consultation process.
So is everyone clear on that one now?
I think what it is we would be doubly consulting with the same public. Our process would be redundant because the federal government oversees that public consultation.
That was my understanding, is that the federal government is the approving authority on this. So our policy that we had in place now has to take second place to them, and we haven't updated it accordingly.
And just experience from another municipality, years ago, that requirement wasn't in the federal realm, so it fell to the local municipalities.
Okay, so is everyone clear on that now? Seeing no more questions, I will call the vote. All in favor? Okay, that is carried. Thank you. So we're on to the collective bargaining agreement. That the Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs approved the collective bargaining agreement between the Service Employees International Union Local 2 SEIU and the Township as appended to draft bylaw 2023-013. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for the hard work put into getting that collective agreement signed for our outside workers. So we are down to bylaws. There are no zoning bylaws, other bylaws. That bylaw 2023-015 being a bylaw to authorize a collective bargaining agreement with the Service Employees International Union Local 2 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Day, Councillor Schuldeis. Any further discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So moving on, we have no unfinished business, no new business. Are there any notices of motions that any member of council would like to bring forward at this time? Seeing none, we will now move into closed session. Councillor Coburn, did you have your hand up?
It's not a notice of motion. I think I'm following in the footsteps of Councillor Winters, who I guess, is it okay to ask for an agenda item to come forward now, or would you rather you and I do that sort of one-on-one, or the CAO and I later? How do we ask for agenda items to come forward?
Okay, so the clerk is nodding her head, so.
Meaning?
I don't know.
Sorry. Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, it would be appropriate to, under notice of motion, provide a notice of discussion as well. So this is an appropriate place to do it as per our procedure bylaw.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Thanks, Carly.
do you have one that you want to bring forward?
If I may, Mayor
Yep.
Carlson, I just note that we have had a consultant's report come through to our office that we had commissioned last year, and that's the corporate emissions and climate action plan. And I would like that to be reviewed and circulated and reviewed and discussed at an upcoming meeting before too long, please.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the CAO to comment.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Coburn, I will double check the date, but I know that on our agenda planning schedule, Mr. Lobley has already scheduled that report to come to council. And I'll just, what I can do is circulate by email to council the date that you can expect that.
Okay, thank you. So if there's nothing further there, the recommendation is that Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs move into closed session at 7:10 p.m. in the council chambers with the CAO and acting clerk remaining in the room to discuss 18.1 personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, library board representation, and 18.2 a position plan procedure criteria or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, potential property negotiation in the former township of Keppel. So could I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Scholdes, Deputy Mayor Pringle. All in favor? That is carried. We are now in closed session. Good night, everyone.
Where are you going?
Do I have Mhm.
And not 3. I guess that's long term, that 3 o'clock, so.
Yeah, really. Okay, we are now back in open session. Council moved into closed session to discuss matters under open meeting exemption B and K of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001. As a result of closed session discussions, the following actions were taken. Following discussions in closed session regarding representation on the library board, the following motion I will read to you. Whereas council received and reviewed 2 applications for the position of community representative on the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library Board and formalized the appointment of the community representative on March 1st, 2023 by bylaw. And whereas community appointee Shirley Holmes provided written notice of her resignation from her position on the library board to the clerk on March 6, 2023, now therefore council hereby approves the following: that the position of community representative on the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library Board is hereby declared vacant, and that council hereby appoints the remaining applicant, Rosemary Buchanan, as the community representative for the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library Board, and that staff are directed to prepare a bylaw formalizing said appointment and repeal bylaw 2023-011 for presentation at the April 12th, 2023 meeting of council. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Sholes, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor. And further to closed session direction was provided to staff. So I'll read the confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 2023-014 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on March 22nd, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor. That is carried. Our next regular meeting will be Committee of the Whole on April 5th at 5 p.m. If there is no further business, I will now call for adjournment of this meeting. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Sholes, Deputy Mayor Pringle. I will call the vote. All in favor. That is carried. Okay.